Good evening, thank you for coming. If you do have a mobile phone, if you'd like to put it on silent, please, thank you. Right, a massive welcome back to Paul Anthony Taylor of the Rath Foundation. Paul, author, lecturer, researcher and talented musician, tonight further covers the heavyweight subject of Big Pharma, the Nazis and the origins of the EU. The excellent work of the Rath Foundation, of which Paul is Executive Director, promotes tremendously useful and important information on how to maintain health and freedom to choose how we might treat ourselves when ill or otherwise. This puts the Rath Foundation at odds with certain business interests. This highlights maximum government and corporate interference deemed acceptable and necessary by an increasingly apathetic and confused populace. More than this though, Paul highlights the astonishing influence of the pharmaceutical industry and the intimate links of huge corporations to war, now known as conflict. If you do have any questions, by the way, during the talk, if you'd like to leave them till the end, that'd be great. Please welcome Paul Anthony Taylor.
Thank you very much, Rob, for that nice introduction. Thank you also for inviting me back. This is my second visit here. My first one was last year in May, I recall. Good evening, everybody. It's difficult sometimes trying to pull together disparate subjects into a coherent whole. And as Rob very ably described there, in this world of ours today, we are encouraged to believe very different truths from those that actually exist. So I'll be concentrating mainly on three areas tonight: the area of health, the area of Nazi and World War II history, and the area of European politics. Because it seems to me and to my colleagues in the foundation that I work for, that these areas, more than any other, not just are, but have the potential to impact in ways on our lives that we can barely even imagine. When I'm asked to summarise how most people perhaps see the structures of government that seek to control us these days, I very frequently turn to these words, which were once spoken by Ronald Reagan. He once said that the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." I don't actually think that he was on the side of the people. I'm not trying to put up Ronald Reagan as a virtuous person and leader that we should all be respecting. He certainly was no hero, and he was no saint. But I do believe these words illustrate that he understood how us the people, even back then, see the structures of government around us that seek to control us. The reality is today that we're essentially living in a world of global information wars. On the one hand, we have the mass media, the media that for decades now has been feeding us propaganda of the sort that we're all, I'm sure, here tonight familiar with. On the other side, increasingly important in all of our lives is the internet and alternative media. And of course, it naturally follows that these two separate sources of information are setting up a conflict in the minds of people and in our lives, because increasingly there is a divergence of opinion, a divergence of fact, a divergence of truth between these two sides. And it's no wonder, with these two influences being increasingly prevalent in people's lives, that people everywhere are looking around sometimes not knowing what or who to believe. All of us here tonight, I'm pretty certain, have learned to treat the mass media, big media, with a long arm of suspicion. This man here was Richard Salant, and he was the president of CBS News during the 1960s and the 1970s. And he once openly said that the media's job is to give people not what they want, but but what we, meaning the media, decide they ought to have. And I mean, he spoke those words, 30, 40 years ago, but really in that time, nothing has changed. And the reality that Sallant described there is the reality that most of us, I think, understand still exists today. It's a lot deeper than that, because we know from CIA documents that the CIA in the United States has been very deeply involved in controlling the media for a long time. This is a CIA memo from 1991, and it shows that even by then, the CIA had relationships with reporters from every major wire service, newspaper, weekly, and television network in the United States. I mean, this is an official CIA document which admits that. But it goes on, it says, in many instances, the CIA had persuaded reporters to postpone, change, hold, or even scrap stories. So the Ed Snowden revelations told us one thing about the ways in which the United States intelligence services are controlling and monitoring the world today. But the influence of the CIA in the United States over the media has been going on for at least now, as that shows, 25 years. Why that's important is because it's pretty well certain that the CIA maintains stations in around 130 countries. And it's unthinkable that other governments' intelligence services are not acting in the same way and haven't been for a long time as well. So we need to be aware of that the influences we are getting from the media are much deeper and much more complicated than many of us still yet realise. The internet, of course, as I said, is very important to all of us now. And again, as I'm sure we're all aware, the corporate influence that seeks to control the internet grows ever larger with almost every passing day. Global interests want to control the internet. They want to control free speech. They want to block the sharing and hindering. They want to block information and hinder the sharing of information. And that's why I'll say right away that meetings like this are so important. This is, as I said to someone a little earlier before we started, this is what will change the world. People meeting like this in communities to share the truth. This is where the world is changed. Don't expect our political so-called leaders to change the world. Even if any of them naively thought they could change the system, they can't. The system is too strong for any one individual or any one political party to change. This is where the world will change, meetings like this. So my talk tonight will essentially be divided into two halves. I'm going to start with the health information war, the war to deny you the truth about what makes health, how disease occurs and how it can be prevented. And then I'll move from that through the pharma industry into the corporate sector, and I'll describe how we were denied the truth. I'll expand upon what I talked about last time I was here, how we were denied the truth about the Second World War, what it was about. I'll talk a little bit about the First World War, and I'll explain how this impacts very deeply on the situation we now find ourselves in, not just in Europe, but in fact in the world as well. I'm going to start by setting out a position which might seem a little bit unbelievable to some of you, but I'm going to do my best to explain it as we go along. But this is essentially the belief, the philosophy of our foundation, that the outcome of the information wars on health will essentially determine the future of mankind. Now, I can imagine that some of you are probably sitting there thinking, that can't be right. He's, okay, the guy's interested in health and he's maybe, not seeing the wood for the trees. Let me just explain one or two things and see if I can maybe take one or two of you with me on this. The first thing, most people who've looked at this are pretty well aware now that the cost of pharmaceutical medicine are rapidly becoming completely unsustainable. I mean, this is $1 trillion industry, the pharma industry. Its total sales of drugs in a single year now exceed $1 trillion. That means that if the pharma industry was a country, it'd make it about the 15th or 16th wealthiest country in the world. But it goes a lot further than that, you see, because a World Economic Forum study a few years ago found that over the following 19 or 20 years, up to 2030, the total economic costs of just the 5 leading chronic diseases could reach $47 trillion. That's trillion US dollars. $47 trillion US is, to put that figure into context, the economic The income of the planet, the planetary income is about $78 trillion. So this World Economic Forum study is saying the costs of just the 5 leading chronic diseases, cancer, diabetes, mental illness, heart disease and respiratory disease, over the 19-year period from 2011 to 2030 could reach $47 trillion. I mean, this is insane. The idea that we have to accept an increasingly expensive system of healthcare that's draining essential resources from our governments, from our taxes, from our pockets. And, we all know, I'm sure, people who've had cancer and diseases and suffered terribly from the side effects of these drugs. Well, there are alternatives, and I will get to that. I'll expand a little bit on what I talked about last time I was here. Okay, so $47 trillion, but, as I'll explain, through the use of natural therapies, it is already possible for people to live longer, healthier lives at less cost to their national healthcare systems. I'll talk some more about that, but this is a fact. 3, as awareness of this grows, which is part of the reason why I'm here tonight, as awareness grows, the economic impact of chronic diseases can be reduced. I mean, that 47 trillion covers 5 diseases. If you add in all the rest, I mean, we're probably, I don't know, we're talking 100 trillion or more. That work hasn't been done yet, but it's an astonishingly unaffordable, unsustainable amount of money. Right. Okay, so I can see you'll not be convinced. Usually, when I say this, wars over health will determine the future of mankind, people say, no. What about energy? What we need is free energy, and free energy will save the planet and save the world. Well, let's take a little look at that. Yes, reform of the energy sector is essential, and it will absolutely, definitely have a major influence. But where we stand at the moment, the available technologies we have, there's a lot of problems that have to be solved. For example, improving battery storage and the efficiency of solar panels and wind turbines. Battery storage is crucial. If you don't believe that, think about where, in a system that's relying on solar panels and wind turbines, where do you get your energy from on a cloudy day where there's no wind? Yeah? Battery storage is crucial if these technologies are going to be viable on a planetary scale. And that's before you get into any of the more exotic sources of energy production, which are, assuming they exist, they're being covered up so deeply, we're not even close to having those available to us yet. These problems are solvable, but the necessary research and investment and development costs are huge, absolutely huge. We're just not there yet. But reforming of the healthcare systems to focus on a prevention-orientated approach is possible and achievable now. We have the science, which I'll summarize. I will not go through the entire presentation from May last year, but this is achievable now, and it has the advantage that it can free up the necessary funding, the $47 trillion, $100 trillion, to enable us to tackle other key problems affecting mankind. Healthcare is the key. It can free up so much. What I'll do now, for those of you who weren't here 16 months ago, I'll do a quick little summary about what we haven't been told about health and disease are determined. First thing is that micronutrients, we're all taught to eat a healthy diet. I mean, no one really argues that a healthy diet is not important. Maybe there are one or two, but I haven't met anyone yet who says it doesn't matter. But you see, we're not really being told why a healthy diet's important. It's important because the micronutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, amino acids that are contained in that diet are essential for the functioning of our cells. For our cells to be healthy, they have to have an optimum supply of micronutrients, vitamins and things. And it's chronic deficiencies of micronutrients that cause problems at the cellular level that then at the level of the organs result in diseases. When you have a heart problem or a liver problem, it's not the heart or the liver itself that's the problem. It's those cells that make up those organs that have been starved of nutrients. Health and disease are determined at the cellular level. which is why the form of medicine that our organisation advocates, we term it cellular medicine. This is what our doctors and researchers refer to it as. And these deficiencies in micronutrients, these are the main causes of diseases like heart attacks and strokes and cancer that the World Economic Forum was referring to. There are 3 discoveries that our scientists have made that are at the centre of the work that our organisation does. I talked about this a lot last time, but I'm just going to sum it up briefly now for anybody who is here who wasn't here last year. The first one is that we now know that atherosclerosis, heart disease, is essentially an early form of what used to be called the sailor's disease, scurvy. What that means is that at the cellular level, heart disease is caused by an insufficient supply of vitamin C. This was first theorized by the founder of our organisation, Dr. Rath, in work he did with the 2-time Nobel Prize-winning scientist Linus Pauling 25 years or so ago. And just earlier this year, Dr. Rath and our researchers published a study that definitively proves this. A study involving mice definitively proving that vitamin C deficiency is the cause, the principal cause of heart disease. This opens up the possibility that therefore it can be prevented and perhaps even treated as well. But you see, it goes further because based on the principle that I've just described to you, micronutrient deficiency is the primary underlying cause for most heart disease conditions today. This includes high blood pressure, irregular heartbeat, the technical term for which is arrhythmia, diabetic circulatory problems, and heart failure. I'll say a few words about heart failure in a moment because I didn't cover that last time I was here. There's a few interesting things that I perhaps should have included. I mean, number 3, the spread of all cancer cells can be inhibited naturally. This is not something that the mass media are going to tell you. But our researchers have now published over 100 studies, over half of which are in the area of cancer alone. Studies published in peer-reviewed scientific journals showing that the spread of all cancer cells can be inhibited naturally. In fact, it goes further than that because we now know that all of the major mechanisms that make cancer a killer disease can indeed be controlled. But we haven't been told. This is the announcement Dr. Rath originally made about the inhibition of cancer cells using natural approaches, published in the USA Today newspaper in 2002, 13 years ago. And our doctors and the media still aren't telling us about it. So once you understand the principle that all chronic disease is essentially the starving of the cells of the body, it has some very interesting implications. One of the most interesting that I didn't talk about last time, of course, is heart failure. Heart failure is when essentially the heart is unable to pump the blood around the body. It becomes enlarged and fills with blood, and the patient becomes bedridden to the point where the only effective treatment essentially is a heart transplant. I mean, heart transplant, I showed a picture, I think last time I was here, of what open heart surgery looks like. It's brutal stuff, If my talk tonight helps to prevent just one person here from undergoing the open heart surgery of any kind, I mean, my time here will have been well spent. But yeah, so this was Christian Barnard, and he was the first man to perform the now fairly standard procedure of a heart transplant. And we've been led to believe through the pharma influence and the media that this is the only effective treatment for late-stage heart failure. But think about it again.